Good afternoon. My name is Jason Otten, and on behalf of the Quad City Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition, we would like to welcome you to our 6th annual Red Ribbon virtual event. I will be your MC for today's presentation, and before I get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded and later posted on the Coalition's YouTube page. A link to that recording will be provided following today's presentation. During the duration of our presentation today, the audience will be muted and cameras will be disabled during the webinar. Following our 3 speaker presentations, there will be a Q&A session. If you would like to ask a question to one of our speakers, you can use the Q&A button located at the top of your screen. Simply type and submit your question, and I will try to get to as many questions during the Q&A session. When submitting your questions, please indicate which speaker or speakers you would like to address your question to. 2 contact hours will be awarded at the conclusion of the program by Unity Point Robert Young Center as a pre-approved sponsor of the State of Illinois IDFPR per administrative rules for nursing and social workers. Contact hours earned for Illinois may be applied to fulfill continuing education requirements for those in Iowa. For those seeking CEUs, there are 2 requirements to receive full credit for today's presentation. 1, you must be present and signed in for the full duration of the presentation. And 2, you must complete a brief survey following today's webinar. A link to that survey will be provided via email following the presentation. Please allow up to 2 to 3 weeks to receive your certificate. Before I introduce our first speaker, it should be noted that some content shared today may be triggering. We ask that if any content today is triggering to you, that you take a moment to excuse yourself during those portions of the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Dakota Smith is the Director of Operations at 180. She leads her organization passionately and has harnessed her lived experience to support others in pursuit of long-term recovery. Her personal journey started as a juvenile while experimenting with drugs that quickly led to a heroin addiction, incarceration, and overdose in her young adult years. Today, Dakota will share the importance of the peer recovery model, how that has impacted her own recovery, and share the recovery capital goals that she crafted to empower sober living for people in her organization today. So sorry, I'll restart that with audio this time.
Obviously for me,
Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
There's a needle sitting here on the desk. She's kind of gasping for air.
So my addiction started when I was 14. By the time I was 19, I started using heroin.
it's something that's very hard to listen to, obviously for me, but for anybody that's never heard somebody go through or go through an overdose or seen anybody go through an overdose, it is very hard to listen to. The reason my wife and I seem so calm and cool and collected is because we're both trained EMTs. We knew what to do. But you can bet afterwards, yes, we fell apart.
And the ambulance is being dispatched right now. Are you with her now?
Yes.
Okay. How old is she?
25.
Okay. And is she breathing?
She's barely breathing, yes.
Okay.
She stopped every once in a while, she's kind of gasping.
At one of my lowest points, I actually overdosed at my parents' house. It was February 13th, 2016. I don't have a lot of recollection of it. I remember being extremely cold and sweat all over my body. I remember it being extremely painful. But other than that, I don't have a lot of memory.
On Saturday, I was getting ready to go to work, and my daughter was staying in our guest room, and because we respect her privacy, we would knock on her door before we entered. So I knocked a few times, never got an answer, and I opened up the door, and what I saw is an image I can't get out of my head. Is my daughter. She's our only child, and what I saw was her laying on the bed, flat on her back, white as a ghost, covered in sweat, with an empty syringe next to her head. And I knew right away that she'd overdosed. While I was on the phone, her mother was giving her rescue breaths, giving her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, because Co was no longer breathing. She was taking a gasp for breath every once in a while.
Okay, what did she take? You said you think it's heroin?
She is a heroin addict. She's a recovering heroin addict. She's breathing now.
Okay, good. The paramedics are on the way, like I said, to help you now. Stay in line. I'll tell you exactly what to do next. Okay, I just want to check her breathing. I want you to say the word now every single time she takes a breath in, starting immediately.
Now.
Breathe again. Breathe again. Come on. You know, Mama's right here with you, don't you?
Did she just say the word now every single time she takes a breath, if you can? Is that her making the noise?
That's her, yes.
Shortly after the paramedic arrived with his basic, and he got in, started an IV right away, gave her the Narcan through the IV, and within seconds, it works very, very fast, and within seconds, she started breathing again. It could have been maybe 15, 20 seconds. She never thought it would happen to her. And as her parents, of course, we are, this will never happen to us.
She's still breathing, sir? Sir?
Yes.
What's she doing right now?
Dakota, come on. Breathe, sweetie. Dakota, come on. There she goes. There she goes.
Is that her?
Okay. That's her.
Good afternoon, Quad City advocates and Red Ribbon supporters. I'm Dakota Smith, and I'm a person with lived experience in addiction. And for me, that means, as you can see from that video, I'm in recovery and free from heroin use. A little bit of my backstory is I grew up kind of often getting passed from grandparents to parents throughout my young adult and childhood life. So that meant that I went to about 13 different schools. I experienced a lot of moving around, a lot of trying to rebuild and develop new relationships. And that's kind of something that really stuck out in my story as I grew up. My mother is someone who has a lot of mental health challenges. And through that, there was a lot of different chaos that kind of happened growing up in that childhood era for me. It was around the time I was 13, 14, I started experimenting, kind of trying out different substances, started with marijuana, it started with drinking, um, really was just trying to explore and figure out ways to make connections with people. A lot of that moving around and a lot of those new relationships, it felt like using drugs or using or experimenting was an easy way for me to connect with people. Um, in my history of using, I was very judgmental. And every time I would, start doing something, it was, oh, well, I'll never do that. I'll never become a pothead. I'll never smoke pot every day. Or I'll never try that drug because it's, crazy and dangerous and all of these different things. And those were things I firmly believed until I reached that level in my addiction. And I constantly would do that. I never in my life imagined being an IV heroin user. It wasn't a part of my story. It wasn't a part of what I experienced growing up. We do have addiction in my family. It was a very hidden thing in my family. We didn't talk about what addiction was. We didn't talk about people in our family who were struggling in that way. It was a very kind of hush hush type mentality that came and was just really resonated throughout my family. Eventually, one day, it led into trying heroin, and I still remember that day very, very well. There wasn't a specific incident that happened in my life. There wasn't um, a specific piece of trauma that happened, and that's what led me into trying heroin. But it was the lack of resilience that I had overall, and then the many different experiences of trauma that I had that really led into that trying heroin. As I used, relationships with men were kind of an entryway for that point. I didn't have a lot of great relationships, a lot of different abusive dating relationships, um, a lot of challenges that I had in that aspect. But I landed into heroin. I used one day and I went back the next day and the next day and the next day. And within a really short period of time, I was using multiple times a day. I wasn't using any other type of substance regularly. Everything in my life was really about heroin. Um, I had a job. I had always been able to keep a job throughout my different, experiences with drugs and alcohol. I wouldn't keep a job for longer than 2 years though, because I would do really well and excel when I started. I've always been able to figure out how to excel even in high school. I was in honors classes and AP classes. I wouldn't always finish them, and I ended up actually getting expelled from Pleasant Valley High School just due to low attendance and just due to not turning in assignments. It wasn't that I couldn't do them. It was just that I didn't have any follow through on my end. And that same kind of mentality really carried into my work life. But as heroin entered into my life, I became completely hooked and obsessed with that lifestyle that it brought around. Um, it wasn't too long before I did get fired from a job that I had. My boss cried the day that she had to fire me because she knew what was going on and she wanted to help. And she had tried to help in many different ways, but I was resistant and kind of pretending like it wasn't a big deal. And at that time, I didn't believe that I was addicted to heroin. I hadn't experienced withdrawals yet. I had been able to maintain consistently in that. It wasn't short after I lost that job that I went to jail for the first time. It was over in Rock Island County, and I got arrested on a holiday weekend, which meant that I had to spend about 3 days before I was able to get released, which means that I experienced withdrawal for the very first time. Um, Even during that time, I was like, this isn't withdrawal. I'm just sick. Something's wrong with me. Um, this isn't addiction. My parents found out about that arrest, and my charge was for having a hypodermic needle on me. And they still thought well, she's not using IV drugs. There's just no way that that's what's happening. Um, but as I got out of jail, my dad came and picked me up. I had him drop me off at the car impound, and told him that I would check in with him when I got home and did not call him back. Didn't talk to him at all. I didn't let him know that I was okay because I went straight to get heroin again. Um, in my addiction, I really firmly believed that I wasn't hurting other people. And as you can see from that video, it's still really, really hard for me to watch because that is the harm that I was causing them. That's the type of harm and that's the type of images that I've left my parents with. Um, but I would really isolate and pull away from any relationships that would be any kind of correction or would try to steer me away from the relationship that I was in or try to steer me out of addiction. I isolated from them. I wouldn't talk to them. I could go for months upon months without speaking to my family or even friends that I had that wasn't in the heroin community. As I progressed in my addiction, theft started to become the way that I supported my addiction, which eventually led to more stays in jail. Um, my second arrest that I had was actually in LaSalle County in Illinois. I got arrested there for a theft, and before I was there for a week, I had Rock Island come and interview me. Detectives come to see me for charges that I had in Rock Island County. So I made it through LaSalle County and was released and sentenced there to my first felony and went over into Rock Island County. And as soon as I arrived there, Scott County came to see me to do the same thing. Um, and so I ended up going on this jail tour. By that point, I knew that I had addiction to heroin, but I didn't really care at that point. I was still so resistant to what getting sober looked like. I knew I had to change something. So my mentality became get out of jail, get a job, get a car, get a place, make sure everyone was pretty much happy and satisfied with what my actions were. But if I wanted to return back into addiction, I probably just shouldn't do heroin. I knew that that was what was really harming me. But as soon as I would get out of jail, I would start this cycle again and repeat those same actions and end up back on heroin within a matter of weeks at times. End up back with new charges within a few months. There was a lot of times that I felt desperate. There was a lot of times that I felt like I was at my rock bottom. I would try treatment. I was court ordered to treatment multiple times, but none of them really stuck. That video, that 911 call that we were listening to, that was in February, and I had gotten released from jail in December, and this was a different jail stay that I had. And I remember really vividly setting down to use, and I remember this feeling coming over me, and I was like, oh, I think this is what an overdose is. And I felt that sensation coming over and thought for sure that this was it. This was the end of all my struggles. This was the end of all of my efforts. This was the end of all of my failed attempts at trying to appease everybody else because that wasn't the life that I really thought I wanted. I remember coming after being Narcan, coming out of that and kind of looking around and just honestly feeling like, why did you waste your time on me? Um, I am stuck in this. This is the life. This is the only thing that is in front of me. And I probably won't be able to ever overcome this. And I remember that really firm feeling of just kind of shutting everyone out during that and just feeling extremely lost and feeling an overwhelming sense of depression with it. Um, I got out of the hospital the next day, went back out and used that within hours of being released from the jail. Um, in the community that I was a part of and the friends and the people that I was around, when we heard of people overdosing from drugs, oftentimes that would become a um, almost an exciting type of we wanted to try that drug that people were becoming addicted to, or becoming having overdoses and experiencing that. Sorry, my phone was going off. And but anyways, so as I went through that and really struggled with walking away from those people, really struggled for walking away from what the addiction was in my life, I eventually ended up back in jail again over in Rock Island County, facing felonies again, and not really knowing exactly what was coming for me. I assumed that I was going to go to prison over in Illinois, and I had accepted that. To be completely honest, I was terrified of Illinois prisons. I thought if I can just make it over to Iowa and go to prison over there, like I can handle that. I eventually went to court and they kind of it was a complete miracle of how those events like took place. And this was back in 2017. As I was sentenced over there, I had more felonies over here in Iowa, so I knew I was coming over here. I was transferred over to Iowa, sat in jail for about 3 months, and my grandparents actually fought tremendously with my probation officer and begged them to give me another chance. I didn't. I thought I was not worth those next chances. I didn't know what other type of chances that anyone would possibly take on me. So I was just kind of there for the ride, and I was totally expecting to go to prison. But my probation officer came with some POs from drug court, sat down and interviewed me to be part of drug court, which is a prison diversion program for individuals that are facing charges. And one of the caveats that they had with coming into drug court was that I would have to go through a long-term program. And that long-term program associated with them was 180. And I was like, oh, I don't think that I'll possibly. I mean, I fail at everything, but all I can do is try. I ended up getting accepted into drug court, got accepted into the 180 program, came here fully expecting that eventually I would be I would mess it up somehow. I wasn't sure how I'd mess it up, but I knew if anyone could figure out how to mess up a good opportunity, it was going to be me. It wasn't very long that I was here before I started calling this place my home, which wasn't something that I had had consistently for a really long time at that point. I worked through the program. It was not perfect for me. I think I still may have the record of missed drug court phone calls. So every night you have to give them a call and say, this is Dakota. I'm at Norma's place, or I'm at this location, wherever my house is. It's such and such time, and you have to do that every night. For some reason, I could not make those phone calls on time. So I ended up going back to jail for weekends 3 or 4 times. But every time I went, it was the first time I knew I was getting out. It was the first time I knew that it would be okay. And I ended up starting to talk to other people that I knew in jail about what recovery has looked like in my life, and being able to share those experiences with them and inspire some recovery in others. Some of those girls ended up coming to 180, and I got to work recovery with them. So it wasn't this perfect story. It wasn't something that I just started to excel at and figured it out and was able to really harness. But it's something that I was able to work on, and slowly those passions grew. I now work for 180, and I kind of explain it as I wouldn't leave, so eventually they gave me a job. I started off as an assistant supervisor to the women's home, and then eventually led the women's home for a few years. And about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to come over into a more administrative role where I work with 2 other ladies, who together we are the kind of a co-director, executive director team, you'd say. So my role is really overseeing the program, overseeing our staff and our properties, which for me is a really big deal because I have the ability then to influence and impact others in recovery. Right now we have typically about 50 residents that are currently in the program with us, and a little more than 50 in our stability, which is our long-term recovery. So as that developed in my life, my personal life also developed. I got married about 4 years ago to an amazing man who's also in recovery. And together we've had 3 children. We have a 3-year-old who's about 3.5 now, which is a huge ball of energy. And we also were blessed with twins 18 months later. So there's an 18-month age gap between 3 kids in our family. And a lot of people, that know my story ask, well, how do you do that? How do you mom 3 little kids, work the job that you do, and maintain recovery? What does that look like for you? And so one of the things I kind of wanted to share about is what we focus on here at 180 and how that's developed. So thanks to the state of Iowa, we were able to send some of our staff through peer recovery training, which is exactly what we do here. Individuals with lived experience then leading a program. And through that, we learned about recovery capital. So when we think about recovery capital, it's really referring to the sum of our internal and external resources that an individual can draw upon to initiate and sustain their recovery. It's really the foundation we have to build and support the life we want post-addiction. It's really crucial because the more we build and strengthen it, the more resilient we become in those face of challenges. So the day-to-day challenges that are going to still happen, whether you're in recovery or not. So really kind of sharing a little bit more about that. Really those internal resources come down to like the resilience and self-awareness that I have. Recovery is a lot to do with self-discovery. It's identifying where my boundaries are, where my barriers are, what my strengths are, so that I can become more resilient over time because I know what those triggers are. I can recognize early warning signs of what a relapse or what just a burnout can look like for myself as an individual. It's really identifying what the healthiest plan is for me, and really being able to figure out how to strengthen that. It's also about understanding personal values and the goals that I have, having a clear sense of my purpose, really having that guiding star in what recovery is, and also being able to really develop who I am, to continue to have personal growth, to have that development. It's adding values into my life like honesty that maybe I didn't have in my recovery or my addiction. It's having those values of commitment. I said before I wasn't able to commit and obtain anything before. I quit so many different things, but today I know that I have the strength to continue on things, even when they get hard. I'm able to fully say that that's what I'm going for, and I can do those things. It's about having self-respect and identifying who I am and working on those self-esteems. It's also that emotional intelligence, right? So understanding my emotions, how I'm going to react to something, where maybe my boundaries need to be in relationships, maybe where when I can say it's okay to not feel a certain way or not to have an expectation over myself or others around me. And when we think about those external resources, we're really talking about that supportive network that we have. Recovery is not a solo journey, and that's one of my favorite parts about peer recovery is having those individuals working together with that shared experience. My life is not the exact same. The experiences that I have, I don't share with every other person in here, but there's things that connect us. There's things that bring us together. There's things that we share and understand and have that compassion and empathy like automatically right off the top. So it's building that supportive network and those relationships, something that, as I shared, was a really challenging thing for me. Understanding how to build and maintain relationships was something that I needed a lot of work in. Another one of the external resources is just access to community resources, right? So I went through the program of 180, but so many other people and so many other agencies were a part of what my recovery exactly looked like, whether it was care from CHC, whether it was mental health support, whether it was any need that I had being addressed by the community, because there are a lot of resources, but connecting to them can sometimes be challenging or feel overwhelming for someone new in recovery. So recovery capital really isn't something that's built overnight. It's something that for me and my story, I continue to build upon. I continue to strengthen those skills. I continue to strengthen my external and internal resources. But I know that I own them. So at the end of the day, when I'm faced with challenges or when I'm faced with impossible decisions, I can rely on the things that I own in my recovery. And when I talk about recovery capital, these are things that I also want my children to grow up learning. They're not necessarily just recovery based. But it's really about nurturing the resilience and building upon that. I know that here at 180, we kind of developed a kind of goal set that we have for recovery capital. I don't know if Jason, if you wanted to share it, but we kind of have this here is kind of our recovery capital goals for our organization. So for all of our residents. So we are a faith-based organization. So we have deepening faith on there, which is a part of kind of that internal motivation and internal access to recovery, right? So cultivate a deeper relationship with God, seeking to understand and trust His plan, embracing His guidance and grace in my life. So kind of part of that learning my purpose, right? And that flows a lot into that impact and identity. So this is something that we want each individual to be able to graduate and say, I know my impact, I know my identity. And it's understanding that I have influence in my community. My story really encapsulates that. The fact that I get to speak to all of you guys today and share some of my background and some of my history and what I've experienced in life. But I have the ability then to influence, hopefully, more change in the future for others and to be a compassionate resource for that. So vibrant health, talking about how to if my body is in check and if my body is well, then I have more abilities to work on other things, right? Thriving mind is that mental health piece that behavioral health is such an important thing that we're proactive about, and sometimes is really scary. Co-occurring disorder amongst those in addiction is just it's tremendous, right? So my story, I had a lot of depression specifically around that time of overdose and not really feeling worth it, right? But through really assessing my own mental health and understanding where some of those thoughts came from, I'm able to, be proactive. I'm able to create strategies and cultivate resilience. And then when we talk about personal growth and development, that's that whole entire thing of those goals, those values. Like, what am I reaching towards and what am I working towards? Workforce readiness, again, I didn't have a great work history. Not something that I was able to really just continue to stay resilient in. I wasn't able to overcome challenges. I wasn't able to follow through on commitments that I had made to work. So really being able to sit there and talk about what growth and excellence and preparing for meaningful employment was challenging for me because I wanted to do good things. I wanted to have a good purpose in my career path, but I didn't see a straight shot forward through that. And being able to stick with it and being able to raise up my hand and say, hey, I want to be a part of this is a big thing that really developed that internally for me. And when we talk about connection and belonging, we're talking about working on those pre-existing relationships and identifying those boundaries that we maybe need to have if we have family or friends or acquaintances that are still struggling in addiction, but also how am I developing into new relationships, those relationships that are going to mentor and support me in recovery, those people who are going to help me be accountable to the goals that I have and help me move forward in what recovery is. Recovery momentum is just really that idea of I'm going to move forward in my recovery. Most of us have heard, relapse is a part of recovery. So what can we do to be positive in that? What can we do to have a thriving future? What am I going to do to fuel those things in my life? Am I going to go to the AA that I should go to because I'm having a rough day, or am I going to sit at home and isolate? So how am I forward progressing through that? Boundary care. I've said boundaries probably a million times today, just because of how important that is. And that's part of that understanding who I am. That's that internal piece of understanding who I am, what my needs are, and validating those things. And lastly on the list is just this essential abilities. That's those basic life skills that some kids experience growing up, some don't. And really being able to put that together and figure out what I need to have for independent living. I can tell you that right before I got married was the very first time in my whole life that I lived on my own, that I paid my own bills, that I did everything all on my own, and didn't have this need for somebody else to be a part of that to validate who I was. And that was one of the most self-building experiences that I had. And I was really able to excitedly be able to say that I could do that. So when we look at those recovery capitals, It's about pulling it all together, and it's strengthening it to a point where I feel, or our residents feel, like they own that, like they own that skill, that they know exactly how to access it. And it's like external too, right? So it's not always about having the right answer, but it's also about, I know who to go to, I know who's going to support me, I know who can help me navigate this difficult situation in a way that's going to help me be successful. So I just thank everyone for allowing me to come and share. And I thank you, Jason, for the invite today. And I'm so appreciative that I got to share today and look forward to anyone's questions. So thank you.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Dakota. What a wonderful presentation. Just amazing, amazing testimony. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you so much for the work that you do in our community and the way that you give back. So if you'd like to, reminder, if you'd like to ask Dakota a question, please do so by utilizing the Q&A located at the top of your screen. You can simply type and submit a question, and I'll get to as many of those as I can during the Q&A session following today's speakers. So our next speaker that I would like to bring is Lieutenant Kevin Smalls. Lieutenant Small retired from the Davenport Police Department in January of 2023. However, he continues to work part-time for the agency, assisting in a variety of capacities. His expertise in the narcotics world is unmatched within the agency. He will discuss information and trends in Scott County as it relates to prescription drugs, heroin, fentanyl, and more. Topics will include why individuals use opioids or opiates, common myths and misperceptions, overdose statistics in our community, paraphernalia associated with opiate use, and counterfeit prescription drug pills that contain fentanyl. So please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Small. Okay, Lieutenant Smalls, are you seeing your presentation? You should be good to go, and then just let me know when you'd like to transition. Lieutenant Small, can you hear me? All right, I think you're unmuted. Can you hear us? Okay. Sounds like we're having some issues with Lieutenant Small's audio. So what I think I'm going to do.
Jason,
Yes.
his mic is, excuse me, Jason, his mic is not muted. We're having some technical difficulty. He doesn't know what's going on.
Okay. I think what we can do is hopefully I think we'll get Mandy, and then we'll try to figure out behind the scenes here what's going on with Kevin or Lieutenant Smalls. microphone, so give me 1 second and I will transition. And so we will just transition over to Mandy Lightfoot. Give me 1 second. All right, so Mandy Lightfoot, she is a behavioral health professional that has worked at Robert Young Center, our Center for Alcohol and Drug Services, or CADS, for the past 6 years. She has a master's degree in psychology with an emphasis in substance abuse. Mandy has worked in the substance use treatment field for the past 9 years with experience in marketing and direct clinical services with a variety of grant involvement. Through her experience, Mandy has gained insights into the rise of methamphetamine use and its impact on the community. Mandy will discuss the origins of methamphetamine, its evolution, prevalence, treatment, and relationship to the opioid crisis. Mandy will also share some beneficial resources available and what we can all do to prevent further misuse and abuse. Please join me in welcoming Mandy.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Mandy. He just mentioned, sorry, I'm kind of waiting for my PowerPoint to pop up here. I'm going to talk a little bit about methamphetamine use today. So in my realm of experience, I've worked in substance abuse since roughly 2012. I got my first degree in 2014, and have had the opportunity to work in marketing as well as in direct service, as well as had some experience with a variety of different grant roles. So I've gotten to see a lot of different aspects of substance use on the front side, on the back side, and just kind of on some trends that I've seen in the last year. I know there's been a lot of focus on opiate use, so I wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking about methamphetamine because it's becoming more and more prevalent, especially in our area. If you could go to the next slide for me. All right, so just a little bit I know this was already mentioned, but just a little bit about what I'll talk about. So methamphetamine, the origin and evolution, its prevalence in our community, treatment options, and then its relationship to the opioid crisis. So what do you know about meth? I know you guys can't unmute, but if you want to throw something in the chat, like what do you know as far as like what does it look like or where does it come from? I know that as meth has become more prevalent, there's been some trainings in the area on it, but I feel like methamphetamine is still that one drug that a lot of people just kind of like we know about, but it's not like something pops into your head instantaneously. Like when you think opiates, you probably think, little white pills, or heroin, you automatically think needles. Marijuana, we think green leafy substance, but methamphetamine can come in different forms. So I'm always curious to kind of hear what people think of when they hear about meth. What's it look like? Where does it come from? Can you actually go back to my previous slide, please? Thank you. So I was just giving people a couple of seconds to type in the chat. I know, again, you can't unmute, but if you want to type something in the chat just to kind of share what your knowledge is. So meth is a synthetic amphetamine type stimulant. It's got a high potential for abuse and addiction. It's illegally produced meth appears like a white odorless, bitter tasting crystalline powder that dissolves easily in water or alcohol. So I've got a picture up here of kind of like the different forms of what meth can look like. All right, and go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned I was going to talk a little bit about the evolution of meth. I'm going to try not to read all of these slides verbatim because I feel like that gets kind of boring. But in general, this is just an overview of what methamphetamine is. It isn't like any other substance, essentially. So methamphetamine was first developed in Japan in 1885. I'm not even going to try to say this name, but I guess Nagashi discovered that ephedra, a plant used to treat breathing conditions such as asthma, also contained ephedrine, a chemical stimulant. 8 years later, he synthesized methamphetamine in 1919. In the U.S., there's actually a really cool trying to think of what to call it, like biography type episode show on Netflix that talks about Adderall, and it talks about Benzedrine. So Benzedrine was actually established in the United States as a nasal decongestant in 1929. And then during World War II, pilots used it to increase their endurance on long missions. The Japanese, German, British, and US military also supplied their soldiers with meth tablets to help them stay alert and be willing to take risks. Starting in the 1950s, methamphetamine was legally manufactured in the United States. So people used it for weight control, to boost energy. Truck drivers would use it to stay awake for long shifts, and athletes would use it to increase their stamina. Next slide. All right, so a little bit of the evolution continued. In the 1980s, the US government tightened the regulation of ephedrine, one of the ingredients necessary to make meth. I don't know how many of you are familiar with ephedra. It used to be in a lot of diet pills, was in a lot of over-the-counter cold medications. With the growth of the internet in the 1990s, the recipes for making meth spread, and small labs began to dot the US landscape. Meth labs were often found in rural communities. Meth labs and the meth that produced were ravaging rural communities. In 2004, an estimated 12 million people, or 4.9% of people in the US over the age of 12, had tried meth at least once. Experts speculated that the number would keep rising without intervention. The Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act of 2005 restricted the availability of pseudoephedrine. The act required pharmacies and retail stores to move products containing pseudoephedrine behind the counter and limited the quantity that customers could purchase in a single visit. So this is where they had to, if you ever went to pick something up that contained this, you'd have to sign for it with the pharmacist, and then they kept a record of it, and you'd only be able to purchase so much in a 30-day period, things like that. Next slide. All right, so the new meth. In the 2000s, the United States and Mexico started to curb the sale of ephedrine. So you might have noticed restrictions in purchasing, like I just mentioned. As a result of those restrictions, we started to see illicit chemists develop a new, cleaner version of methamphetamine made from phenyl 2-propane, or P2P. So unlike ephedrine, P2P is used in too many things to be regulated. It's in racing fuel, tanning, gold mining, perfume, photography. So it's one of those chemicals that unfortunately we just can't regulate because it's in so many things. Next slide. So how is methamphetamine different from other stimulants like cocaine? I did include a picture here. So the top picture is a chemical version of what amphetamine looks like. So this would be like Adderall, and then methamphetamine is the one underneath. So if you can see that they're pretty much essentially the same thing, they're just slightly different. So the methamphetamine molecule is structurally similar to amphetamine and to the neurotransmitter dopamine, a brain chemical that plays an important role in the reinforcement of rewarding behaviors, but it's quite different from cocaine. All these stimulants have similar behavioral and psychological effects. There are some major differences, though, in the mechanisms of how they work, so basically how they affect the brain. In contrast to cocaine, which is quickly removed from and almost completely metabolized in the body, meth has a longer duration of action and a longer percentage of the drug remains unchanged in the body. So methamphetamine remains in the brain longer, which ultimately leads to prolonged stimulant effects. Next slide. All right, so the misuse of methamphetamine remains an extremely serious problem in the US. In some areas of the country, it poses an even greater threat than opiates, and it's the drug that most contributes to violent crime. The consequences of methamphetamine misuse are terrible for the individual. If you've ever, any of you that are in the field have worked with individuals that struggle with meth, it affects them psychologically, medically, socially. It's got some serious side effects: memory loss, aggression, psychotic behavior, damage to the cardiovascular system, malnutrition, severe dental problems. It can also contribute to increased transmission of infectious diseases like hepatitis and AIDS. Beyond its obvious health effects on individuals, methamphetamine misuse also threatens communities, causing new waves of crime, unemployment, child neglect, abuse, and other social ills. So some of the challenges that come along with treating methamphetamine, quitting meth isn't easy. The exact statistics regarding quitting the substance vary. There's obviously very high relapse rates, prolonged withdrawal symptoms, methamphetamine's impact on the brain, and social environment factors make meth a challenging substance to quit. So there's high relapse rates, prolonged withdrawal symptoms. There's a significant neurological impact. Often the brain has changed so much that people trying to quit meth may find it hard to experience pleasure from non-drug related activities. Like I mentioned before, it affects that dopamine, so the reward center. With prolonged withdrawal symptoms, we see a lot of physical symptoms, especially dental issues, malnutrition. Next slide, please. All right, so when it comes to treatment, methamphetamine has been the most difficult, I think, in my experience for us to be able to treat in substance use because there's not as many options. So although medications have proven effective in treating some substances like alcohol and opiates, there are no current medications that can be used to counteract the specific effects of methamphetamine. The most effective treatments for meth addiction at this point have been behavioral therapies, so cognitive behavioral therapy, and then contingency management interventions. Contingency management interventions, which provide tangible incentives in exchange for engaging in treatment and maintaining abstinence, have also shown to be effective, as long as motivational incentives for enhancing drug abuse recovery and incentive-based methods for promoting cocaine and methamphetamine abstinence. So in my experience over the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to work with a couple of different grants, and this is something that I specifically have had experience with. So when we're talking about contingency management, this is, again, remembering that methamphetamine really affects that dopamine, that reward center. So in order to get people to kind of get on board with staying engaged in treatment and to stay engaged in treatment longer, these different grant programs have provide what we call recovery support services, or kind of like incentives essentially for staying engaged. So for example, some of the things that the different grants provided to people would be like, for a clean drug screen, you could get a gift card. Or if you stayed engaged in a treatment program, then you could get recovery materials or a yoga mat, or something basically that kind of like rewarded you for staying sober. And what we found is that the people that were engaged in these grants, that were getting those recovery services where their primary substance was methamphetamine, they not only stayed engaged in the programs longer, but if they did disengage, they returned to the programs sooner, and they were more likely to be honest or share with their quote unquote treatment team or their grant team what was kind of going on with them. So if they did relapse or if they were struggling, then they would reach out because they knew that they needed to stay in touch or stay sober in order to continue to get those rewards. So being able to just kind of have that hands-on experience and see how people responded with these contingencies has really shown that, like, although we don't have the medications like we do with alcohol and opiates, there are kind of like other options out there that I don't think every treatment program is currently using, or maybe they don't have access to it. I know a lot of it comes down to funding. Yay, funding. But just being able to kind of figure out what's going to work for these individuals. I don't know how many of you in the field have really noticed the rise in meth use, but it seems like from my experience that most of the individuals that are coming to treatment now, either methamphetamine is their primary drug or it's their second drug of choice, essentially. So I'm seeing a lot more methamphetamine substance abuse diagnoses than I am alcohol or opiate, or it's in combination with something else, or they can't get cocaine, it's too expensive, so they switch to methamphetamine, or they're using meth to self-medicate for something else. So being able to kind of figure out what's going to work for them in order for them to be able to maintain that sobriety long-term, because it's so difficult to treat at this point in time. Next slide, please. All right, so what does this have to do with opiates, I guess, right? So the mix of stimulants like cocaine and methamphetamine with fentanyl, a synthetic opiate 50 times more powerful than heroin, is driving what experts call the opioid epidemic's fourth wave. I'll kind of briefly talk about the other waves here in a second, but the mixture presents powerful challenges and efforts to reduce overdoses because many users of stimulants don't know they're at risk of ingesting opiates, so they don't take overdose precautions. Next slide, please. All right, so a little bit of background on the opiate crisis. I feel like this has really been drilled into everyone's heads over the last few years because it really has been a problem. But in the US, the first wave of the long-running and devastating opioid epidemic began with the abuse of prescription painkillers in the early 2000s. The second wave was involved in increase in heroin use, which started around 2010. And then the third wave began when the powerful synthetic opiates like fentanyl started appearing in the supply around 2015. Now experts are observing that fourth wave I mentioned of the deadly epidemic. So nationwide, illicit stimulants mixed with fentanyl were the most common drugs found in fentanyl-related overdoses. So basically what's happening is that we're seeing a rise of overdoses in individuals that are using stimulants. The stimulant in the fatal mixture tends to be cocaine in the Northeast and methamphetamine in the West and much of the Midwest and the South. Next slide. All right, so I've got some pictures here in this slide and the next slide, and I apologize. I know these are kind of small, so I hope you can see them better than maybe I can at the moment. But on in-depth examination of the increase in meth-involved overdoses, fentanyl was also found to be listed on a majority of death certificates, showing that the potent opioid has actually been driving the increase. So there's emerging evidence that the adulteration, which is basically just the combination of methamphetamine with fentanyl, may be present in the current illicit drug supply. So individuals may also intentionally combine methamphetamine with an opiate, sometimes referring to this as speedballing or goofballing. The combination increases the risk of overdose and adverse side effects, specifically from respiratory depression. Risk is especially increased among methamphetamine users who've not taken opiates prior to their exposure to fentanyl due to their absence of opioid tolerance. So in the little picture I have here, essentially it's showing just the total overdose deaths, including methamphetamine, which is going to be your blue line. And then the overdose deaths involving methamphetamine and any opioid is the red line. Overdose deaths involving methamphetamine and fentanyl is your green line. And then overdose deaths involving methamphetamine without fentanyl. It's going to be that orange line. Next slide, please. All right, so what's the driving force? It's not necessarily clear how much of the latest trend in polydrug use is accidental or intentional. So recent studies have found that most people who use fentanyl do so intentionally, but other times unintentionally. Other factors include manufacturers adding the cheap synthetic opioid to a stimulant to stretch out their supply. So basically what they're doing is they're mixing fentanyl into the methamphetamine to make it stretch further because fentanyl is so cheap. Many people think that they're using pure methamphetamine, which is a misconception that can be deadly. People are using stimulants and not intentionally using opioids, so they're unprepared to respond to the overdose risk because they don't think that they're using opiates. Next slide. All right, so as news outlets and research studies show the prevalence of opiate overdose continuing to rise, the research basically undercuts the prevalence of methamphetamine in the statistics. So data reports from treatment facilities show methamphetamine is one of the top primary substances of abuse. Providers, communities, and law enforcement have to ask, is it really an opioid crisis or is it methamphetamine on the rise? I think it's a little bit of both. We obviously still have an opioid crisis. There's an influx of fentanyl in the stimulant substance realm, and it's not necessarily just methamphetamine, it's also cocaine. But we've seen a lot of restrictions on opiates, so we're not seeing so much that people are overdosing on prescription pain medications as we are seeing that people are overdosing on other substances that have meth or cocaine and fentanyl in it. So again, the use of cutting agents is a trend driven by drug dealers. The Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, estimates that 4 out of every 10 counterfeit pills purchased on the street contain a lethal dose of fentanyl. Additionally, a study conducted in Europe tested 524 random samples of cocaine. Of the samples, only 10% contained pure cocaine, with 5% containing no cocaine at all, and the remaining 445 samples all contained at least one or more cutting agents, such as fentanyl. So these are just some more examples of kind of showing the different rates of substances that people are using and where opiates lie in that picture, where methamphetamine lies in that picture. I know they're kind of small. I apologize for that. But just kind of wanted to give an example of where we're seeing this rise in use of methamphetamine and kind of how fentanyl and opiates are playing a role in that. All right, so what can we do about it? So fentanyl test strips are a harm reduction strategy. Fentanyl test strips are a low-cost harm reduction tool that can be used to prevent overdoses in combination with other strategies. They're small strips of paper that can detect the presence of fentanyl in different kinds of drugs like cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and drug forms like pills, powder, and injectables. In recent years, numerous states have changed their drug paraphernalia laws to allow users to possess fentanyl test strips. They're now allowed in every state except for Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, unfortunately, and North Dakota and Texas. All right. So on the other side of that, so in light of just talking about substance use in general, I work for CADS, or Center for Alcohol and Drug Services, Unity Point, Robert Young, lots of names. And we offer a variety of different services in order to help treat individuals that are struggling with substance use. We offer evaluation and assessment and treatment options. I did list on this slide the various treatment levels of treatment that we have. So we offer residential treatment, halfway house program that's in Iowa only, IOP or intensive outpatient programs, outpatient services, continuing care. We have a methadone clinic, a gambling program, and we also have adolescent services. I will go through these real quickly. I don't want to, I have been trying to watch my time here, but our locations, this is our outpatient facility in Iowa, Fairmont. This is where we have our gambling program, our administration and business offices. This is our residential location in Iowa, Country Oaks. We offer adult residential and halfway house. This is a 24-hour facility. Robert Young, or Rio. This is also an adult residential detox and outpatient service located inside the hospital at the Rock Island campus, and it's also a 24-hour facility. Rock Island offers adult outpatient services, our methadone clinic, DUI services, and then I also listed our methadone dispensing hours there. Our East Locust location is our outreach. They offer prevention and our adolescent outpatient services. All right. Thank you guys for your time. I hope I didn't talk too fast, and I appreciate you. This is my first, I guess, opportunity to speak. So I feel like I stumbled through it, but I appreciate it. I think next time I'll do better. But if you have questions for me at the end, hopefully I can answer for them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mandy. What a wonderful presentation for that. And so just a lot of great information. So thank you for the work that you do as well in our community. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to go back to Lieutenant Smalls and see if we were able to figure out our technicals. If not, I think we're going to try to go a different route here. So give me 1 second and we will transition back.
You should send me a ticket.
Okay, Lieutenant Smalls, can you check your microphone again and talk for us and see if that works this time? All right, it sounds like we still may be having some technical audio problems. So we are going to try to get Lieutenant Smalls on a phone so that we can play him through a speaker, just so at least we can hear him, and then I will transition his PowerPoint. So give us 1 minute.
with the Davenport Police Department. I spent 28 years on the department, and a majority of it was spent in narcotics enforcement. My goal today is to kind of make you aware of some of the trends that are taking place in the Quad City area, and that the narcotics that are prevalently used in our area. Can you go next slide, please? What we're going to cover is prescription pills, counterfeit pills, cocaine, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, ecstasy, and LSD. What is prescription drug abuse? Prescription drug abuse is when someone takes medication inappropriately, such as without a prescription, in a way other than prescribed and for the high. The problem is every day in the United States, thousands of teenagers abuse prescription drugs for the first time. Prescription drugs are the most abused drug by teens after alcohol, marijuana, and tobacco. Why do people use? Well, they desire to experiment, escape depression, boredom, enjoyment of risky behavior, belief that drugs solve personal problems, and peer pressure to fit in. And Dakota had mentioned that during her journey of fighting the addiction that she encountered. Some of the myths: prescription drugs are safer to abuse than other drugs because they are prescribed by a doctor. Using stimulants, medications such as Adderall or Ritalin can help teens do well in school by improving focus or energy. We're going to first cover opiates. I can tell you right now, the Quad City area has seen an influx of opioids in the area, even since I've left, since January 2023. The common opiates are morphine, heroin, Oxycontin, oxycodone, Percocet, Vicodin, and fentanyl. Then we have our stimulants that we see, drugs that speed up the central nervous system. Common stimulants are caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, amphetamine, MDMA, also known as ecstasy, and also bath salts. The depressants that we see that are drugs that slow down the central nervous system, their common depressants are your alcohol, your barbiturates, your tranquilizers, and your sleeping meds such as Ambien. Commonly abused prescriptions in Iowa are fentanyl, hydrocodone, and oxycodone for opiates, depressants, Valium, Xanax, and then your stimulants, Ritalin and Adderall. Heroin. Heroin is highly addictive opioid, naturally occurring, derived from the poppy seed. Methods of use are smoked, snorted, and injected. Heroin is sold in this area in tenths of a gram up to a gram. Cost can range from $10 to $30 for a tenth of a gram to $300 per gram. An ounce of heroin in this area would cost you $2,000 to $3,000. The common packaging associated with heroin is sandwich baggie corners and aluminum foil. You can see in the illustration of the photographs, common paraphernalia utilized for heroin use You have your burnt aluminum foil, which they can smoke it off the aluminum foil. Then you have your hypodermic needle and all the kit. The spoon with the burn marks is when they put the heroin into the spoon, add water and a heat source, and then they have a small cotton ball that they put in it to draw the liquid from the spoon into the syringe. Off to the right is common packaging for heroin. You can see the different colors. Heroin comes in tan color, gray color, and I've seen it in many other colors over the years. Some additional paraphernalia and packaging that we have found in search warrants in the city of Davenport. Fentanyl is a potent synthetic opioid used as pain medication. It also is used illicitly in recreational drug use, sometimes mixed with heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine. And like Mandy brought up, that's what we're seeing more and more of in this community is you don't know what you're getting. You could be buying a gram of cocaine and it could contain fentanyl or some other drug in it. The heroin is predominantly containing fentanyl, and even our methamphetamine is containing some fentanyl. Fentanyl is commonly used to create counterfeit pills disguised as Oxycontin, Xanax, and other prescription drugs. Rainbow fentanyl. This was out a photo from years ago where you can see the different color of pills that are displayed in this photograph. This is to basically get younger generations or younger people into the drug usage and drug market. Fake Percocet pills, what do they look like? Counterfeit pills are nearly identical to actual prescription medications. The majority of the counterfeit pills resemble oxycodone, 30 milligrams, or M30s, that can also mimic hydrocodone, prazolam, Xanax, Adderall, and other medications. There are indications that drug trafficking organizations are specifically targeting kids and teens by creating counterfeit pills in a variety of shapes and bright colors from the traditional white and blue color. The best way to avoid counterfeit medication is to only take medications prescribed by licensed medical professionals and dispensed by pharmacies. Fake Percocet pills, counterfeit pills are fake medications that have different ingredients than an actual medication. They may contain no active ingredient, the wrong active ingredient, or have the right ingredient but an incorrect quantity. Counterfeit pills may contain lethal amounts of fentanyl or methamphetamine and are extremely dangerous because they often appear identical to legitimate prescription pills. You can see in this photograph, the top left and the bottom left are prescription pills, M30s. The top left is actually the actual prescription drug. The bottom left is a counterfeit pill, and it contains fentanyl. The middle photograph is the top is a legitimate pill, authentic Adderall pill, and the bottom is an Adderall tablet containing methamphetamine. And then off to the right is a Xanax tablet white, and the counterfeit Xanax tablet contains pure fentanyl. And that's what the problem is today. How can you really tell unless it's prescribed by the doctor? Cocaine. Cocaine is a strong stimulant, commonly snorted or injected into the vein. Common paraphernalia used to ingest cocaine is snort tubes, straws, pins, rolled up dollar bill, razor blades, plates, and mirrors. This is an illustration of what cocaine looks like. To the right is the powdered white form. And then to the left is actually 3 kilos that we actually seized during the investigation several years ago. Crack cocaine. Crack cocaine is a smokable form of cocaine, strong stimulant, highly addictive, sold in rock form in $20, $50, and $100 increments. A $20 increment of crack cocaine weighs 1/10 of a gram to 2/10 of a gram and is about the size of an eraser on a pencil. Paraphernalia associated with crack use is metal or glass tube with Brillo in one end and a filter at the other end. Some additional photos of a significant amount of crack cocaine that could make, if you broke that all down and chopped it up, it'd be thousands of rocks of crack cocaine. When I first started doing narcotics enforcement in 1998, crack cocaine dominated the area, along with cocaine and marijuana. Methamphetamine, central nervous system stimulant, discovered in 1893, a synthetic injected, snorted, or smoked substance. Most often used recreationally, but does have very limited medical use, like other amphetamines, to treat ADHD, and obesity. Produced in clandestine laboratories in both China and Mexico, and shipped into the United States. What's dominating this area is ice methamphetamine, which is the purest form of methamphetamine. In the late 90s and early 2000s, we dealt with a lot of meth labs in our area, and either the anhydrous ammonia method, the red phosphorus method, or the one-pot method. Now, since there's abundance of ice methamphetamine in this area, you don't see the manufacturing of it in the local area anymore. If we would somewhat disrupt that chain or that supply that's coming from the southwest borders, we might see that creep into the area again. Methamphetamine sold in at $30 and $50 for a half gram and a little over $100 for a gram. You can see that the methamphetamine comes in various colors, light orange or light tan. It just depends on the production method of how much they clean up the powdered methamphetamine. Ice methamphetamine looks like shards of glass or broken glass. Again, that is what is dominating the area, and ice methamphetamine is smoked. Ecstasy, also known as MDMA, it's a synthetic psychoactive drug sold in pill and powdered form known as Molly. Molly is a pure crystalline powdered form of MDMA or ecstasy. The problem we see now with the ecstasy is the fact you don't know what you're getting, and most of it's coming back as pure methamphetamine. Some illustration of what pills look like with the insignia stamped on it. LSD in the late 90s, early 2000 was prevalent around this area. We don't see it as much anymore. It's a psychedelic drug manufactured from lysergic acid, sold in bladder paper, gel tab, microdots, in liquid form. High can last up to 12 hours. Prolonged use or abuse, you could have flashbacks years down the road after quitting. Here's some statistics for the nation and our area. Opioid deaths as of 2023 nationwide, it was 81,083 opioid deaths in 2023, down from 84,181 in 2022, approximately a 3% decrease. Iowa recorded 237 opioid overdose deaths in 2022, down from 258 in 2021, which is about an 8% decrease. 2023 opioid overdose deaths is 238. Iowa's total overdose deaths is 446. For the city of Davenport in 2023, we had 7 deaths and 346 recorded overdoses. In 2024, currently, we have 8 deaths and 148 overdoses. According to the 2023 report for Midwest HIDA, and Midwest HIDA is the agency that provides funding for the state of Iowa, the state of South Dakota, Illinois, North Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa and Missouri comprises Midwest HIDA. During their assessment for the year, they found that fentanyl will likely continue to pose the greatest overdose threat to the region as the supply is expected to increase. Drug Enforcement Administration laboratories testing in 2023 revealed 7 out of 10 fentanyl-laced counterfeit prescription pills now contain potentially lethal dose of fentanyl, up from 4 out of 10 in 2021. Fentanyl is expected to remain the greatest driver of drug poisoning deaths for our region. The different alterants such as xylazine and metoclopramide are often great concern to Midwest HIDA and will continue, especially if they have increased impact on poisoning deaths in the region. Some additional numbers for overdose deaths, top 4 categories from 2018 to 2023. Any opioid deaths, you can see that Scott County is 3rd on that list at 101. Benzodiazepine OD deaths, you can see Scott County is 3rd with 32. Cocaine overdose deaths, Scott County is at 25 and 3rd on that list, and the psychostimulants such as methamphetamine were 4th on that list with 56. I can tell you that the agency, the City of Davenport Police Department, is committed to our partners in combating the opioid crisis and also the methamphetamine crisis. And we will continue to do the enforcement action. We have a great partnership with our Scott County Attorney's Office, and we have a great relationship with our U.S. Attorney's Office when it comes to these type of investigations. And we will continue that. Thank you very much for having me today.
All right. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Small. And so this is going to bring us to our question and answer segment. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask any of our speakers today, just please utilize the Q&A at the top of your screen. And so I will transition there now, and we will begin asking some questions to our speakers. So one of the first things here I see is recently heard the term pink cocaine. Is this a trend beginning in the QCA? Pink cocaine, correct. Is that a new trend that you're hearing about in the QCA?
No, what I will tell you is the color of cocaine, depending on how it's transported. I've seen pink cocaine over the years, not very much of it. It just got diluted with something else, which changed the color of it. Usually cocaine is pure white, but I have seen it in a pink form.
Okay, thank you. Next question is geared towards Dakota. It says, wondering if Dakota had any concerns about going to a faith-based program. Did you have that in your background? I have patients who are apprehensive about going to a faith-based program. So Dakota, do you have anything you can add to that?
Yeah, I grew up in a family who would definitely is Christian background. We didn't attend church, we didn't, that type of thing. But I was super apprehensive actually because I felt like, being a Christian or going into a faith-based program was going to be this like perfection type situation, or that was going to be the expectation. I'll say that that's not been my experience with that journey at all. So I was very apprehensive, really struggled with thinking that I'd be able to make it through something like that, and be able to meet those expectations. But I was met with people who met me where I was at. My expectation wasn't to become a Christian to come into a program like this. It was to at least participate, right? So attend things, and then things kind of naturally changed for me in my own personal life.
Great. Thanks so much, Dakota. Our next question says, I guess I'll give this towards any of the three of you. So it says, can you give an example of something that builds resilience?
Um, I can for myself. I really consider anything that is building that life that's worth staying sober for as building into my resilience. So I'm someone who likes to try many different things. So this Christmas, I am doing some embroidery for gifts for Christmas. So that's like a very small thing that's building into my resilience. Relationships are also really, really important for building into resilience, especially for children. So having a solid relationship in my life that is building me towards something better is really important.
Yeah, thank you. So another question I see that's come in here says, who oversees physicians over prescribing?
The state of Iowa.
Can you say that again, Lieutenant Small?
The state of Iowa, and also there's federal mandates. So they are overseen by agents and an agency in that is employed by the state of Iowa.
Right. Thank you. So those were all the questions I saw in the Q&A, but I see that a few have come over here in the chat. So I want to make sure I jump over and grab those well since we have some time here. One of the questions says, do you find lived experience is huge in working with substance abuse?
I believe that's for Dakota.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of new information because this is something that's kind of really being pushed right now, specifically in the state of Iowa. So they've opened up the peer recovery classes through it's actually CCAR in Connecticut that does the training. But there is a lot of evidence and statistics showing that individuals that are paired with a peer recovery specialist, has an increased likelihood to continue through treatment, has an increased likelihood to make it to doctor's appointments, has an increased likelihood to stay out of jail, decreased hospital visits, and things like that. From my personal experience, there was something that was really comforting and something that kind of helped me identify what I could be, right? And so gave some aspiration to, okay, so this other person has also been to jail. This other person has also used these types of drugs, and they're now okay, and they're now successful, or something that I could like look up to as a model, as a role model in my life. So there was something that really helped a lot of connection. And I'm really excited about being a part of peer recovery. So
thanks so much, Dakota. So I see another question that was a little bit further up in the chat here. And so maybe we'll address this towards Mandy or Lieutenant Small, so whichever would like to, or maybe both of you. It says, where do you get your statistical information? This is from a person that's somewhere else in the state. They said they'd like to know as far as counties from Story County, Boone County, even Marshall County. So where do you guys get your statistical information from?
Well, I can tell you mine came from Midwest HIDA's 2023 annual report that is provided to law enforcement all over the state. And I can tell you the demographics, they even just talk about that, and I need to look at my notes here. But the ages range from 18 years old upwards to 40 years old, 45 years old of drug use and overdoses from that aspect of it.
This is Mandy.
Sorry, I
didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say most of my data came from the Iowa Department of Public Health and Human Services. There's reports out there, they're PDFs. There's a 2022 State of Iowa Substance Use Epidemiological Profile. And then there's also some other data and research out there that you can pull up and kind of just see different trends. Some of the graphics that I have in my PowerPoint came from those websites.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. Lieutenant Small, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, it depends on the type of substance that is being used, but it can range from, like for cocaine, from 25 to 34. You know, for methamphetamine, it ranges from 25 to 44. You know, you got the age gaps of 15 to 24, and that is all provided. If you go to Midwest HIDA, their website, they will provide you additional information of what the region is seeing.
Great, thank you. And it looks like I see Dakota posted a great resource here in the chat for you all. There's a link that she provided. It says the 2023 report for Iowa Department of Public Health links. So make sure you check that out. Another question that came into the chat here says, this is for any of our speakers. It says, can you describe in general any trends in the demographics of users in the Quad City area? So like gender, age, etc.
Gender, ages, and all the demographics. I think as you see 18-year-olds and getting older and moving forward in age, it just depends on the addiction of the individual and the substance that they're using. But I think it covers all of it. That's the thing is with addiction, it has no it doesn't see race, it doesn't see age, and it can affect so many different people, and it has.
Right. And so I got one more question here, and I think I would love to hear kind of feedback from all of you on this. So maybe we'll just go in order of, we'll go Dakota, Lieutenant Small, and Mandy. And so the question is what would you like the average person to know about substance abuse?
I think I kind of have to echo what Lieutenant Small said. Addiction doesn't have a bias. It can affect anyone. And I think advocacy and talking about it and normalizing language around it is really important. I know that had a great impact on me, kind of coming from a a family where that was not talked about, not something that we were really understanding or admitting to. So really that advocacy piece of bringing light to it, because I think that that's what's going to have the greatest impact on really helping somebody earlier on in their journey through addiction, and making an impact before maybe major life events have happened, or, worst instances, overdose.
Right. So Lieutenant Smalls, what would you like the average person to know about substance abuse?
Well, kind of to echo Dakota, it can affect anybody. And what I would really, events like this helps educate our community. And I think from the drug world aspect of it is having the partnerships with CADS and Robert Young and these different wraparound services, and also with the police department with the enforcement part of it. We are trying to clean the streets up from the dealers, and try to assist and help the users as much as we can in referrals. And sometimes some people need to, unfortunately, have to be court ordered into certain things, and that's through enforcement. But the biggest thing is the education. When Narcan came out and being administered, it saved a lot of people's lives. But it also gives them a little bit of a sense of some type of security, which may not, depending on the fentanyl or the substance they take. It could be a lethal dose, and sometimes it takes 6, 7, 8, 10 Narcan blasts. I can tell you the police department carries Narcan, and we administer it when it's appropriate and when it's needed. But the biggest thing is the education. And if you suspect somebody that needs assistance, speak up. Talk to somebody. Get them the help that they need. Or if you suspect somebody selling narcotics, please contact the police department, and we will at least try to investigate it to confirm or deny that's what's taken place. But the biggest thing is speak up. Keep speaking up and help your family member or friend or whatever the case may be from having to go through this horrible, vicious cycle of being an addict.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Smalls. So Mandy, what would you like the average person to know about substance abuse?
I think that just a little different on what Dakota and Lieutenant Smalls had said is that to remember that it's not always the substance and not to always just blame the substance. I think we still need to remember that there are other factors that play into someone's addiction or their behaviors or the way that or why they're using a substance. And a lot of that has to do with mental health. Some of it has to do with things like traumatic brain injury, TBI. So just to try to remember that just because a person is using a substance or has been using a substance and maybe they're exhibiting a behavior or you think that they're high doesn't necessarily mean that they are, and to just be considerate and kind, and try to show empathy to those individuals, because I think sometimes, especially people that have a history of using substances, the people that care about them or the people that interact with them on a daily basis are just kind of like, oh, they're just high again, or they get to a point where they don't want to help them anymore, and sometimes it's just trying to dig a little deeper and figure out, okay, well, what we've been doing isn't working. Have we explored the mental health? Have we tried medications? Have they experienced a traumatic brain injury? Because sometimes, a lot of times with people that abuse, like alcohol, for example, they have falls, they hit their head, they don't go to the ER, they don't get the help that they need right away. And so maybe they have a traumatic brain injury, and then when they use a substance, that can have a significant impact on their behavior, and it might not be typical of what they would normally be like.
No, that's great, Mandy. Thank you so much. We in prevention here, we like to say, we believe in seeing the person and not the addiction, right? And so with that, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So I want to take this opportunity to thank our wonderful speakers today. And And also, just on behalf of the Quad Cities Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition, we want to thank you all for attending today's event. Just a reminder for those seeking CEUs, a link to a brief survey will be emailed out following the conclusion of today's event. And so again, you must complete that survey in order to be eligible to receive the full CEUs. And again, please allow up to 2 to 3 weeks to receive your certificate. Again, thank you for attending today's presentation, and we wish you all a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you so much.